Okay, right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Bob Simmons, one of the directors at Bain Simmons. I'm joined this afternoon by four of my technical specialists with Steve Huff, who leads on safety risk management, Dwayne Kritzinger, who leads on part 21J, so the design and certification side, Kev Hopwood, who's leading on the production organisation aspects this afternoon, and finally, John Elkin. John's going to be talking about the part 145 aspects. So thanks for joining us this afternoon. The objective of this session is to really start a conversation about safety management and how it's going to be introduced into the remaining airworthiness organisations. Just to qualify that a little bit, the airworthiness organisations would include Camo, and of course Part Camo has already had the SMS requirements implemented, so we won't be talking about that. And Part 147 is not included within this rule change as it stands at the moment. So we're going to be looking at Part 21 and Part 145 this afternoon and talking around that. So I've asked the team to be very practical and to talk about what this means in reality, what impact it's going to have on those organisations that are affected, and to give them some ideas and examples about implementations and how to make the best of what is essentially a regulation-driven change. So we fundamentally believe at Bain Simmons that if you get your implementation right on these sort of programs, then clearly it can be good for business, not just from a safety perspective, but also from a commercial and operational perspective as well. So, okay, let's get going. So next slide, please, Dwayne. Okay, so just a quick introduction then. So usual sort of rules. I'm going to go through these quite quickly. So if you could just respect what other people say, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that. We're all professionals here. Please mute your microphones unless you're asked to speak. We do encourage you to ask questions. We're hoping to get lots and lots of those. And what we'll do is we'll get through as many as possible as we go through. And then if you need to make an immediate point, then just raise your hand. And I see that we've already got one hand, and I'll come there in a moment, Terry, as soon as I've completed this introduction. So yeah, if you put them in the chat box for the questions, then we can look at those. And any that we can't answer in the time that we've got this afternoon, we will put those into a web page to respond to you subsequently that you'll all have access to. So Terry, go ahead. You've got your hand up. Still muted at the moment, Terry. I'll tell you what. I think we'll come back to you, Terry, at the moment because we're not hearing at the moment. So just hold that question or put it into the chat box, and we'll deal with that. Okay, Dwayne. Next one, please. Okay, so the work that we're going to be talking about this afternoon is really about introducing the requirements that are within the ICAO Annex 19, published some time ago, into Part 21, Part 145. So the opinion has been issued by EASA, and for those of you that are not familiar, that's the way in which EASA makes the recommendations to the European Commission that something is introduced into law. Okay, so they recommend as part of that decision the implementation program. And as you can see from the second bullet points there, it's applicable 1 year after publication. And then there'll be a further 2 years to close any findings on the novelties introduced. So in effect, what happens is that law comes into being, and then you will be given, if you're within those affected organisations, findings to actually comply with those new requirements within that 2-year period. And it'll then be down to the authorities to work with yourselves to close those findings within the 2-year period. And ultimately, if you don't make it by the end of the 2 years, then that could have an impact on your approval. Okay. Now, as you can see, we've started to talk about the European Union, and I'm very aware that there are a lot of non-EU people here, including the UK and others around the world. So in terms of the legal applicability of this, It is going to be the EU and therefore the EASA territory. And the UK has determined that it will comply with all of those EASA regulations that will be issued going through at the moment. So the decision was during Brexit that actually any regulatory changes, particularly if they were driven by ICAO changes, would be adopted within the UK. So this will become law in the UK at the same time that it is issued within the European Union. Okay. So the draft AMC, the acceptable means of compliance, and the guidance material is being prepared. That's still ongoing, and it will be captured in a comment response document, which is expected early in 2022. So if you did want to have a look at a bit more detail on this, including some background and some of the justification for the changes, then the opinion that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen there, 04 of 2020, gives a lot of information. But at the bottom, you can see that it was due to be adopted by the Commission in the last quarter of this year, sorry, the last one as of today, so 2002 quarter 3. And then with the EASA decision with the AMC and guidance material coming about at the same time. So it's a little bit behind where it was. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so just to give you an understanding at a very high level of the requirements that really come out of ICAO Annex 19, as you can see there, the 4 pillars identified that altogether come under the roof and the banner of safety management systems. I'll talk about safety management systems and our perception about the way in which it is perceived and the way in which it can sometimes be implemented that may well affect its effectiveness in its day-to-day use. As you can see across the bottom there, all of that safety management system with its pillars and the overall system is affected and very much really given its power and its ability to make change by a just safety culture. Steve will be talking about that a little bit later on. That's really one of the major enablers to an effective safety management system. Okay, I would comment at this stage that if you look at this picture, you can see that every part of it includes the word safety. Now, having worked with a large number of organizations over the years that are at various stages of implementing safety management systems, those organizations that have really latched onto this initiative and refer to it as a safety management system, is fair to say are struggling somewhat to get it to become the day job. We've worked with major carriers in the past that have experienced some significant occurrences, and yet on paper, they have a fantastic safety management system. But of course, safety isn't produced by paper, procedures, forms, or policies, or matrices, or anything like that. Safety is produced by people, and the way in which they behave and the way in which they think is what makes this all work. So our approach to this is not actually to refer to it, much the same as the EASA does within its regulations and within its document, as a separate safety management system, because that could infer that it is separate from the day job. And we'll talk about that at length a little bit later on. Just wanted to introduce that. Okay, next page, please, Dwayne. Okay, so the topics we're going to deal with today, I'm going to be talking about safety, the management system philosophy, the way in which that is documented and can be applied within organizations out of the EASA documentation. We're going to ask Steve to talk about the reliance on occurrence reporting in a just culture. We're then going to look at the fundamental changes that are being brought in each one of the regulations we're talking about. And that's where the technical guys will get more into detail about what the actual changes are to each of those organizations. It's fair to say that in some of them, it's got a bigger impact than others. And in some areas, such as 145, we're already doing quite a lot of what is required. So we'll just be addressing the differences. And then towards the end, we'll have a look at foreseen difficulties and opportunities, and just hopefully then get into your questions to really start to illustrate and answer your questions about how this can apply. So please go ahead and type out your questions as we go. Next slide. Okay, so going to talk about the management system approach. Really, we've picked up that term from the requirement, the headline requirement that is published by EASA. So their means of implementing, the EASA means of implementing Annex 19 is through a common integrated management system model. Okay, so common. So what do I mean by common is that if you look across all of the different sector requirements that exist within aviation, so air drones, air traffic, flight operations, etc., you will notice that the management system requirements are very, very similar. It's absolutely the same intent and the same major elements that actually make up the management system. Integrated, we've really put that in. EASA has spoken at great length about the need to integrate safety management into the remainder of the organisation's management activities. And again, we'll come back to that in a little bit more detail. So the keywords that we're going to latch onto, if you like, the requirements for the management system, is that there is a requirement that organisations implement and maintain a management system, including the management of safety risks. So straight away, you can see it's not referring to it as an SMS within the regulation. And it then aims for its continuous improvement. That's embedded within the basic regulation under the EASA system and within the UK. Supported by the establishment of an occurrence reporting system, which again, Steve will be talking about. So why should it be integrated then? Initially, let's have a think about that. So we come back to that example that I stated earlier on, where we've been working with major operators that have suffered some significant incidents, where the safety risk management of their organization, in their case, labeled a safety management system, where it's been absolutely fantastic on paper, has not really been applied and not certainly adding any value within the actual operation. People's behaviours largely continued as they had prior to the introduction of the new requirement. And when we've spoken to people that have worked within the systems and we've said to them, you know, what do you think about the SMS, or what is the SMS? They would say to us, well, it's the system that you step into when something goes wrong, or when something nearly goes wrong, or when you're worried about something making us go wrong. Okay, so those words of stepping into, so there's the day job, and then when things get a little bit risky, that's when you would step into the safety system. So clearly, if it's not integrated into the thinking and the behaviors of people that are doing their day job as part of the day job, then it will always be an add-on and will be a second consideration to actually delivering the operational demands. Okay. So what is integrated? And this is explicitly specified within the regulations. So the management system elements. So we're talking about compliance monitoring. We're talking about the inferred management of compliance. We're talking about safety risk management. We're talking about competence management, communications, all of those other things that you would find as the key philosophies of any management system. So the integration of safety into that and not dealing with it as an add-on or as a separate activity is fundamentally built into the regulations. It also explicitly specifies within the rules that multiple approvals in the same organisation may be implemented as well. So if you've got an operator, they can sometimes hold up to 6, 7, 8, sometimes even 9 separate regulatory approvals, all of which need to have a management system to ensure good performance. They can now be integrated because the requirements and the concepts are all common. Okay, so multiple approvals can be brought together. So if you've got a number of approvals that require it, then you can bring them together. You can then optimize your management resources, your processes, procedures, your reporting tools, and any database that you might choose to adopt as well. Okay, right, next slide, please, Dwayne. So what is it then? Let's just have a quick look at what's actually specified there by ICAO for Annex 19. So a systematic approach to managing safety. So systematic, and again, I would encourage you not to drive this thing as a process or a procedure, although those will be required. The biggest thing that is going to give you the benefit and bring this to life, if you allow people or you encourage people to consider safety in everything that they're doing without explicitly saying so. So this is about competence development to influence people's behaviors so that when they are undertaking an activity, they are unknowingly scanning for hazards. They are thinking about risks. And at the appropriate time, they are then submitting a report so that the system can manage those risks that have been identified and assess the risks associated with the hazards. Okay. So it includes the necessary organizational structures, accountabilities, responsibilities, policies, and procedures. So again, what EASA has done is integrate the safety elements into the policies and procedures, into the responsibilities of the nominated persons or the responsible managers, and clearly attached ultimate accountability for safety to the accountable managers. So safety, defined as the state in which risks associated with aviation activities related to or in direct support of operations of aircraft, reduced and controlled to an acceptable level. So let's just dissect that a little bit. So aviation activities related to or direct support of operations. So we can extend that and ask, well, what does safety mean for a design organization, a production organization, or a maintenance organization when they may be far removed from aircraft operations? Now, this is where all of the assumptions that you've got within the approval and the certification system depend on those organizations, each managing their activities and their output to ensure that they are not introducing risks or hazards into the system for ultimately the operators that are going to be flying the aircraft. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, we're miles away from an airport or from an operating aircraft, you need to think about how your product or your service may contribute to the airworthiness and thus the safety of the aircraft once it's in operations. So I would argue that your risks are different from an aircraft operator, but your risks are associated with your product. Okay, so what does it infer if we talk about an SMS? As I said, is it another system? Is it a bolt-on? Or does it feel like it's separate from the day job? I've discussed that already a little bit, but I think it is absolutely key that you do not talk about safety as something special. That might sound funny coming from me and from Bain Simmons, because actually we're all about safety. But if you deal with it as a separate subject that has to be thought about separately, then it will not gather the momentum that it will if it's integrated into the day job and people are thinking about it without knowing they're thinking about it. Hopefully that makes some sense to some of you. Okay, right. Next slide, please. Okay, so just having a look then at the management system, just very quickly. It's looking at combining those outputs from the SMS, or the safety risk element of your safety risk management element of your management system, with quality and compliance monitoring elements, and also looking at bringing in your operational and your commercial inputs. And EASA has published this, that your safety needs to sit alongside the reality of the day job of managing commercial outputs. And if you can combine your mitigations that you're bringing in for business reasons, for safety reasons, for quality reasons, for operational reasons, into a single way of thinking about developing the organization, then you'll truly integrate it. And regardless of whether it's a safety flag that says we need to do something different, that could be seen as an opportunity to improve your overall business performance and not just your safety performance. And in that way, people can now see how it makes a difference to their life within the organization and their ability to contribute to the overall success of the organization and not just deal with a safety issue that's actually come up. Okay. So it enables the accountable and responsible managers to make those risk-based, data-driven decisions. So this is all about providing them with the picture that they can take decisions. Now, there is a perception that if you implement something called an SMS, then the biggest impact that you're going to see from that is that it stops you from doing things. I would argue that if you've got a robust risk analysis process, it may give you the confidence to do things that you might not otherwise have done. Because the risk analysis has to have some substance and structure around it that is relevant to your business. And if you're assessing risks in terms of their impact on you, as well as the wider safety piece, then it enables you to then make the decisions, including the business attitudes and the, if you like, the angles of commercial as well. So it's then about allocating the resources efficiently, and that doesn't necessarily mean spending more money. Sometimes you can do things more smartly, and it will result in a safer, more compliant and effective operation, and therefore business. So not much more from me, you'll probably be glad to hear. It's worth just pointing out that all of the aviation regulations from EASA identify the individuals known as nominated managers or responsible managers within the system, those Form 4 holders as they're sometimes referred to, as being the individuals who are responsible for performance within their part of the organisation, their function or area. So they're responsible for compliance and also for safety performance. You will not see that a safety manager is responsible for safety. Safety manager is responsible for managing the system that facilitates the improvement of safety or the management of safety risk. Okay. I remember Jean-Marc Clouseau, who used to be in the JAA years ago, a conference years ago. He said, after he transferred to Air France as safety manager, he says, I have a great job. He says, I am the only one within Air France that is not responsible for safety performance. I am responsible for hosting it and for facilitating the conversations that improve safety performance. Okay, and it really stuck with me, that, and he's absolutely right. If you're using a safety manager to push safety into an organization, then it's not going to flow easily. Whereas if those responsible and nominated managers understand that they are responsible personally for that as part of their role within the approved organization, it's more likely that they consider safety as part of their day job. Okay, next slide, please, Dwayne. Okay, so just very briefly going to introduce our smart map. If you look at the colored elements in the center, I'm sure you would recognize the titles, compliance monitoring being the new term for quality assurance. But the green, purple, red, and orange elements are essentially required by the regulation, and that's your management system. Okay. There are some great organizations out there that are fully compliant, have good quality assurance or compliance monitoring, good human factors area management and safety risk management that still have systems that don't work. And sometimes the reasons that those organization systems don't work and don't really actively manage their safety is because they don't have a proactive culture. The culture and the behaviors of the individuals, you've heard it many times, I'm sure, really contributes to the overall success. But you won't get your culture unless you've got a fit for purpose management system, so something that is suitable for the organization. Active leadership, so really engaged leadership that is encouraging people to talk, accepting that people will make errors sometimes. Managed competence, that people are given the skills to be able to engage in the system, not just the technical skills for their job, but the ability to communicate, to own up when things go wrong, or to report when things maybe didn't go as planned, and to proactively think about what might go wrong for the future. Then supportive capability, it's giving them the tools and the systems to support them, make it easy for them to do their job. So talking in those terms, if you've got a management system that's fit for purpose and a supportive capability with the skills, the leadership, you will get the culture that then contributes to the continuous improvement. And it's the same things within those colourful boxes in the middle that contribute to commercial success within an organisation as they do safety. So again, if you're thinking about capability from a pure commercial perspective and you're not considering safety, you're missing something. And the same exists the other way around, that if you're making an improvement for safety reasons, you may well be missing the trick in terms of improving the commercial operation and success of the organization as well. So the final element of that model, our model then, is the robust assurance. And that's really a higher level of assurance to look at the overall performance of the organization. So it's more of a strategic view, independent view to the management team about how the organization is doing against its strategy. Yeah, that includes safety, commercial, operational aspects within it. Okay, so those enablers around the outside will really gear up your management system to be effective. They are inferred in the regulation, but they're not explicitly required. And I'm sure that Steve will be wondering at the moment why I've mentioned that, and he will talk about that at the moment, about culture, and actually that there are some regulations there already to actually deal with that, and we'll go on to that. Okay, next slide, please, Dwayne. Okay, so this is a model that has been generated that shows how an organization matures over a period of time. So if we look at time being the the lower axis from left to right, and then we look at the maturity of an organization on the left-hand vertical axis, then you can see over a period of time, then an organization, if it gets it right, will progress through ensuring that the elements that are required are present, ensuring that they're suitable, and it's at that level that the regulators should give you your approval or approve amendments to your systems and your arrangements, your means of compliance. That's all they can do at that stage, because present and suitable is all they can look at, because you can't operate it until it's actually approved. Then operating is when the people within your organization are really engaged in the system and are contributing with reports, investigations, etc. And then effective is when you get your payback. And that is when you are effectively managing risk to an acceptable level. And if you get it right, that actually the organization is becoming more reliable. Yeah, that your output has a greater availability, that you're actually more efficient and more profitable as a result. So that's the point B, really, that you'd be looking for, is to get to that state of performance against all of those different criteria that I have mentioned. Okay, so PSOE, it was a concept that was created by the Safety Management International Collaboration Group, which was a joint industry, academics, and also regulators, particularly EASA, that created this scale of assessing an organization and how it was developing. Okay, next slide, please, Dwayne. Okay, so at that point, just having given a bit of a background on SMS and the organization management system and the way in which it can actually grow and mature, I'm going to hand over to Steve, who's going to talk about the occurrence reporting and just culture. Now, these tend to be fairly standardized approaches, which is why Steve is talking about this in a collective way. Then the other guys will talk about the specifics in their areas when I hand over to you. So thank you, Steve.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Bob. So I'm going to talk firstly a little bit about risk. I'm not going to go too deeply into safety risk management, but just a couple of the concepts and then how we can inform risk by having a healthy occurrence reporting culture. If I can have the next slide, please. So, as I say, we're not going to delve too deeply into this, but this is one way of looking at risk. Just to go through this, on the basic risk management cycle, we first do some hazard identification to see what could be affecting us out there. We do some risk analysis to make so we can see is that a credible risk to us. So that's the dark blue band at the top. What that does is show us that, well, the risk might be in a tolerable zone, but it may also be intolerable. So in this case, it's intolerable. We move on to our next step, where we would do some risk reduction mitigations on that, where we'll do some effects on it. We have to action that. It's owned by somebody and implemented. So this is us coming to our planned residual risk. We've got a risk out there, we've done something about it, and we've brought it down to the level, and you can see the dotted blue band of ALARP, reducing the risks to as low as reasonably practicable. And this is where, as an organisation, we want to be. This is the risk under control. This is where we're happy. This is where our accountable manager is in a tolerable and happy zone with the risk. And this is what we talk about. Our work is imagined. We're sat all warm and comfortable in our head office looking out there and going, we've got everything under control. This is where we want to be. But then if I can have another click, please, Dwayne. But what we want to do is actually monitor the risk, see, have the things taken effect that we want out there? Has it come as far as we want to do? And another click, please, Dwayne. But real life actually gets in the way now. We have humans in the system. They cut corners. Things change. People don't follow our perfect, or what we think are perfect, procedures that we've put in place. So to actually understand what our risk is on a day-to-day, a week-to-week, or a month-to-month basis, we need some safety performance measures in there to actually see what's going on. We need to understand what the work is done out in real life, out on the hangar floor, out on the flight line, in the design offices, is actually going on. Now, the best way for us to get this information is from your people. They are your best source of intelligence out there. So we want them to talk to us, or you want them to talk to you, to tell you what's going on. And this is why reporting, and this is where our safety risk picture really links into our occurrence reporting, is we want to encourage that reporting because it's the lifeblood of the management system. There are other data sources out there, but your most important source of data is people actually telling you what's going on day to day, because you don't always have the same picture when you're in the head office, and particularly when you're designing these processes and procedures. As Bob said, there's a lot of compliant organisations out there with what look like very impressive management systems, but the actual reality of what's going on is sometimes different. So the next slide, please, Dwayne. So actually, you may not know, but there already is occurrence reporting regulations. And that's right at the top here in parallel to the basic regulation, the EU regulation. And again, for those in the UK is still following these. So the basic regulation then distills down through all the EC regs and all the different approvals, as does the occurrence reporting law, EU 376, which first came into being in 2014, but I think it was 2016 when it actually fully came into effect. And it's been mentioned in the AirOps regulations and in Part CAMO for some time. And you have actually already been under this, but now with the new guidance coming in for Part 21 and Part 145, they're actually strengthening this, and it refers back to EU 376 quite a lot. It mentions that you shall have an occurrence reporting system, and it should be in accordance with EU 376. So this is the background that you'll be working on when you come to introduce or further implement and enhance your occurrence reporting system. And you will get, at the moment, there are no AMCs as yet. We're still waiting for the opinion to be fully published, but I think it will be very similar to what we see in the AirOps environment and in other areas as well. And again, it refers back to EU 376. So the next slide, please, Dwayne. So what is EU 376 telling us to do? This document is quite widely available. You can search for this and download it. A lot of EU 376 is directed to the state. It was actually for them to collect a database and collect reports in a specified format. As an organisation, you can have a look at this and you can look at which formats you need to report in. There's some templates in there and some formats. But what you have to do is submit these reports. You have mandatory occurrence reports, MORs, and it already states, and there are various different elements in there, but this I've highlighted from more on the technical side, occurrences related to technical conditions, maintenance and repair of aircraft, such as structural defects, system malfunctions, maintenance and repair problems, and propulsion and APU problems are already in there. Those are the things that you've got to report. And it also states that a person engaged in designing, manufacturing, continuous airworthiness monitoring, maintaining or modifying an aircraft or any equipment or part thereof under the oversight of a member state or agency is behest to report within this. So you've already been covered in this, even if maybe it's not been highlighted in the past. What EU 376 also wants us to do is report voluntary. And next click, please, Dwayne. And voluntary reporting covers pretty much everything else. It's the details of occurrences that don't fall under those mandatory elements, or anything other safety related information which is perceived by the reporter as an actual or potential hazard to aviation safety. Now, these are the slips, the near misses, the I almost did this, the things that aren't on those necessarily big scale, but something that your staff, if you've got a healthy safety culture, are telling you about. There's something for you to go off and fix, to make improvements on. This is for internal purposes. Now, under EU 376, it also says that you can send this on to the state authority as well to improve that database if you consider it suitable. But these are the things that the state doesn't necessarily need to see, but you want to see. You want to know what's going on. You want to know why procedures aren't being followed. You want to know why or how things are done on the hangar floor. So the voluntary reporting feeds into that as well. And that's another element which EU 376 states that you should do. Other elements within EU 376 talk about a just culture. Now, we want people to report. We want to tell us what's going on out there. So they also need to feel able for that. They need to trust the organisation. They don't want to think, if I put a report in, I'm going to be sanctioned for that. This is going to affect me, going to affect my career in the future. So there are protections in there, both for the protection of information, the withholding of names from the state when you're putting that forward, but also for your organisation. It says each organisation established in a member state shall, after consulting with its staff representatives, adopt internal rules describing how just culture principles are guaranteed and implemented. So you shall have a just culture, which is easier said than done. So how do we do that? The next slide, please, please, Dwayne. So what EU 376 states in its definitions of what a just culture is, it means a culture in which frontline operators or other persons are not punished for actions, omissions or decisions taken by them that are commensurate with their experience and training, but in which gross negligence, willful violations and destructive acts are not tolerated. Now, that's the EASA or the EU line on this. We have a little bit of a different approach to that. And yes, those errors, those mistakes, those things are not meant to happen, absolutely should not be or should not be punished. But some of the terms here, like gross negligence, gross is quite a heavy term, quite a legal term in a lot of cases. Willful violations, all violations are willful, but you need to look at why people were doing that. Was it with malicious intent? Was it because they just didn't care? Or was it actually for the gain of the organisation? What goals were they trying to achieve when they knew that they were perhaps cutting corners? So there's some elements around that, but that's what a just culture is. It's a culture of trust that people put that report in, knowing that you're going to use it for safety benefits and not to come after them. So they are protected. They want you want an environment where people tell you everything that's going on, and you're going to react accordingly as the management or the people behind that. So how do we bring in a just culture? EU 376 quite shortly says you shall have a just culture. Well, you need a just culture policy. You need things there that actually state what's going on, signed off by the management. If you do not have management commitment on this, it won't work. It can't be just driven by the safety manager. This comes from the top down and all the way through the organisation. You need to improve people's competence. How do they understand what a just culture means to them, and how do they actually work within that? If you're doing investigations or dealing with things, you need a process, and you need a communication plan for rolling all of this out, so we can see where we are with all of this, and get that information out so people know where they stand. We're not going to go too much further into just culture, but if you are interested in it, we came up with a tool some years ago now, which is widely used across both internally in this industry, but also in other industries as well, called FAIR, which is the flowchart analysis of investigative reports. It's on its third iteration now, which really looks at the right mitigations that you're bringing in for events. But it gives you guidance on how to run an investigation, how to look at behavioural analysis, and some processes in there. This is free to industry. We're not selling this, absolutely not. And you can go to our website and pick it up from there and have a look at it, which will give you some idea of a framework of what works for this. So please have a look at FAIR 3, see what you think of it, and that will give you, say, a framework to work around. So next slide, please, Dwayne. We'll have a look now specifically at the impact of the opinion, and here looking at part 21, which in some ways it's got the bigger impact, because in the past, in 21A3 alpha, it stated there were failure, malfunction and defects reporting system. Now it's just the reporting system, and it's bringing in new elements, which might be a little more work for the part 21. You may have got some internal reporting already, but now there's a little bit more rigor and a bit more structure coming into it. So it gives you more clarity. So you shall have a voluntary and a mandatory reporting system. There needs to be analysis and follow-up of occurrences or groups of occurrences and things around that. A just culture needs to be in place, or the principles of, to get people reporting and talking around that. And there is protection for that source of information. So it's put some rigor around that. And as I say, this is something that might be a little bit of a new concept in the part 21. So something to have a look at EU 376, have a look at FAIR. The system itself doesn't need to be overly complex. It's just a method of reporting in. You can look at the formats in EU 376 and you need a database to manage it. There are off-the-shelf solutions as well you can go for, but keep it simple, keep it usable for your people so they'll talk to you. And I'll just ask Dwayne, anything you want to add on this as our part 21 expert?
No, the fundamental difference is the voluntary occurrence reports, and the engineers, design organizations need to get their heads around and understand what do we mean by voluntary reports. It's those unexpected slippages, the deviations from procedures, the faults in our supply chain. The challenge is just to get those reports in earlier, not when we sign off and accept documents and then find something's wrong, which is an occurrence report because that's an indication of management failure or the management system failure, but to try and get some of these more proactively so that before we go too far down a rabbit hole, we can discover where the problems lie.
Yeah, it's all about getting that information ahead of the curve so we can act on it as soon as we possibly can, getting an understanding of that work is done. So thank you, Dwayne. And Kev, anything you want to add from your side?
No, nothing to add really. It's just that you can't actually shape improvement if you're not aware of these issues. So everything relies on the system being informed that there are failures in that system.
Yes, yeah, and I actually saw a comment just pop up in the chat box there. So EASA has made it mandatory to voluntary report. Yes, they've made it mandatory that you have a voluntary reporting system. You don't necessarily have to pass that further on. So at least that you have the mechanisms that people can tell you what's going on in your organisation. But yes, that's quite an interesting comment on that. If we go to the next slide, please, Dwayne, we'll also have a look at part 145. Of which the changes here aren't so large because there has been reporting requirements already. There are MORs in place. I think a lot of organisations have already perhaps looked at EU 376 or been aware of it to some extent. But again, there has been some changes within there. So no change to what should be reported or how, because that is in place. The occurrences related to technical conditions, maintenance, repair of the aircraft, and within it, paragraph 3, maintenance, continuing airworthiness management remain valid. There is an enhanced focus on safety, though, because the introduction of 145 Part A200 management system and the internal reporting safety scheme, so there's more guidance in that. And the requirement to manage safety end-to-end by identification and control of your risks. And that reporting, that identification of your risks, if you don't know what you don't know, you cannot manage those risks. So this is a key element now of feeding that information in there. It will require some organisational restructuring. You'll need to revise the MOE and just change some of the procedures and maybe do some competence development. But there's some subtle changes there rather than a big bang. in that case. And John, I'd just like to hand over to you if there's anything you'd like to add as our 145 specialist.
No, I think you've summed it up very neatly there, Steve. Actually, that it is more subtle, but it doesn't mean you should be any less attentive to the changes required. The whole idea of this is the management of change is a key part of it. So this is a change, and what a great place to start with your system by introducing the new regulation. Thanks.
All right, well, thanks, John. And that, as I say, it's a very short introduction to occurrence reporting. And I'll be obviously staying online, and any specific questions we can deal with in the chat box and at the end. So I'll now hand over to Dwayne, who's going to talk about SMS in Part 21J. So thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Steve. So yes, so let's look at what changes they're doing in subpart J of Part 21. So the big change that's going to happen is in 21A239. 21A239 was always the paragraph that was entitled the Design Assurance System. They're going to remove the word assurance from it and call it the design management system. So you can see we're adopting this language of the management system approach. And then it'll go on to say that this design management system, and the management system is the way you run your design organization, shall include, please note, it doesn't say shall consist of. What EASA is telling us here, what the regulator is telling us, is as a minimum to satisfy the regulator, it should include, or shall include, a design assurance element and a safety management element. Now, obviously, you need to add other elements in your management system, such as configuration management element, financial management element. There's lots of other elements we need to run a high-performing design organization. But from the regulator's point of view, what they're looking for evidence in your handbook or your exposition is a design assurance element. That remains as is. Fundamentally, that's going to remain unchanged. So there's nothing new there. It's all about how do we plan for certification, how do we design for certification? How do we define a type certification basis and prove that type certification basis? That remains as is. What is new is the safety management element. Okay, the safety management element within your design management system. This is new. Okay, so let's explore what this safety management element, what the requirements are, and surprise, surprise, it's going to address the 4 pillars. Because that's what SMS is fundamentally summarized as, the 4 pillars of supporting SMS. So it's going to include a safety policy, safety assurance processes, safety promotion. We're going to have to appoint key safety personnel and occurrence reporting. Occurrence reporting and the related risk management activities that go with it. Okay, now the appointment of these key safety personnel doesn't mean you have to employ new people. This is a delegation of responsibilities, could be a delegation of responsibilities to existing personnel. Okay, you could have somebody act as a safety manager along with the other job role, and you'll co-opt the right expertise, if they're competent and trained for it, to participate in safety review boards and safety action groups as necessary. Okay, and it's integrated into the management system approach. Now, I'd like to focus on the last point where we talk about occurrence reporting and safety risk management. Now, occurrence reporting will show us where we have vulnerabilities in our business, because if we know where the vulnerabilities are, we can risk manage them. We can dedicate resources, we can remove the risk from our business, the risk of getting it wrong. Okay. Now, when it comes to risk management in a design organization, there's 2 things we need to consider. One is product-centric. So here we're talking about making sure that the aircraft, the modifications, the repair schemes are safe. Nothing's changed there. That remains unchanged. Those activities we're still going to do, but what the safety element's going to bring in that's new is an organizational centric approach. So not what is product safety risk, what is going to cause a hole in the ground, what's going to cause an unavailable aircraft, more what are the organizational risks we need to be concerned about. Okay, now I don't have too much time to go into too much detail of what this means, but I will point you to something. If you go to YouTube and you just look for Leonardo safety performance video, you'll find some work that we did with this company a few years ago. They were pleased enough to make it widely available. And there's a specific clip in this video that I'd like you to study. It's a clip where the head of design speaks with one of his 2 ICs, one of his managers, talking about managing organizational risk in a design organization. And I definitely encourage you to go and look at it because it'll give you a great idea how to manage organizational centric risks. I've taken a screenshot from it. It's a little blurry because it's from a video, but you should get the idea. Okay, so the technique they used there for managing organizational risk is something called barrier-based bow tie. Okay, now in this case, the hazard that they're concerned about as a design organization is there's a potential that unwittingly we could release an unsafe, non-compliant design. We do all the activities that we said we would, but without knowing it, something goes wrong. And that so often happens. Look at many of the accidents happen. Look at what happened on the 737 MAX. A lot of good work went in, but there were things that resulted in unsafe conditions because it wasn't expected. Something was missed. Okay, so that's the hazard that the head of design is worried about. Ultimately, the head of design needs to sign a certificate of design declaring the extent of compliance and there's no unsafe feature. Well, no unsafe feature, that's how do you manage that risk of no unsafe feature? Well, what they've done here is that they've identified the hazard they're trying to manage. On the far left side of the bow tie, they've identified various causes, things that can contribute to that hazard being released. Okay. And then what they do is they build barriers in. Now, the barriers are based on James Reason's Swiss cheese model, is where we put barriers in place to prevent that cause from transmitting and ultimately releasing a release to a hazard. But those, James Reason called it a Swiss cheese model because the Swiss cheese has holes in it. So the question is, you set up your management system with barriers. You're hoping those barriers don't have holes in it, but how do you know? And how big are those holes? And do they fluctuate depending on where we are on the project life cycle or when things start going difficult and we start applying pressure to get the job out in time? Okay, so these are all the barriers. I know you can't read it here, but you can explore it in more detail on the video. Here are all the barriers they have in place. And what you'll notice is they've got a dashboard system here of green, amber, and red. That is fed from the auditing processes, audit findings, internal audits, and also from the occurrence reporting, where people report where barriers aren't working, where barriers aren't as strong as what we think they are. And you can use that to drive a dashboard. Where it's green, we have lots of confidence in our barriers. Those barriers are quite robust. But where it's amber or even red, that draws management attention to where our management system can improve so that we can manage the risk of unwittingly releasing an unsafe or non-compliant design. Okay, I do encourage you to go and look at the video. It's quite informative. Okay, now case study to show how what is it we're looking for. Here's a real case event where an aircraft unfortunately crashed. It was an experimental G650 in 2011 in Roswell, New Mexico. The aircraft was on takeoff and it had an uncommanded roll event. So uncommanded roll event, it hit the deck and destroyed the aircraft and killed 2 pilots and 2 flight test engineers. And by the way, these aren't graveyard aircraft. This is an operational airfield. So they came pretty close to taking out some more aircraft. And this was done during the flight testing phase. Now, the flight testing phase, that means it's during the initial airworthiness phase. It's under the control of the design organization. Okay. The NTSB, the US NTSB, got involved in the investigation, and you can go and download the report to read everything in it. But I've highlighted some key findings for what we're talking about today. Firstly, there are 2 previous uncommanded roll events. So twice before in the flight trial program, the aircraft had an uncommanded roll event and nobody said, stop the bus, get off. Now, we could speculate about why that could happen, but if you read through the report, you'll see they were behind schedule. There was a lot of pressure implied. And I know exactly I can guess what would happen in those meetings. People were sitting there saying, how can this happen? Why this happened? The pilot said this just happened. And they try and debate and analyze. And after a few days' work, they say, it's impossible. It can't happen. Keep flying till it happens again. Because there's pressure to get the aircraft out the door, to get the project complete. Okay, now, under the new regime of how Part 21 is going to change, that will become, firstly, a voluntary occurrence report, because currently the occurrence reporting system we have is to report external events of aircraft post-certification so that we can report it to the authorities to initiate AD action. That's what the current occurrence reporting system is for. The new occurrence reporting will put an obligation on a design organization to also report events in the pre-certification phase. Won't result in AD action, but it indicates problems in the organization. Now, it would definitely be a voluntary occurrence report, and because of the serious nature of this, it would also need to be reported to the authorities. New. We don't usually report problems in the certification phase to the authorities. Now we will have to. And if we put this report into an official occurrence reporting system in our management system, the management system kicks in and stops the project from making decisions that drives project performance. It brings it back into the risk the project is bringing to the organization. Now, some more findings: that inadequate control gates and validation processes. So those of you familiar with the V model of systems engineering, there was problems in system engineering principles and the way they were managing it. There was inadequate technical oversight and safety management. Now, these aren't surprises to the people on the ground. The staff on the ground know where there are vulnerabilities. They know where people are taking shortcuts. They know what works. They know what doesn't work. What we want them to do is to report those so it can draw attention, so we can focus on removing it before it creates these type of incidents. And finally, this project had a very ambitious schedule, frequent delays, unachievable deadlines. They just applied more and more pressure. Keep flying, we need to get this out. And they accumulated risk. Well, that's another occurrence report. The minute you start slipping on your schedule, that's a risk that needs to be managed, because the minute you start applying pressure on people, then people start making mistakes. Or they get fatigued and they omit something, or they forget something. That's a risk that needs to be managed. That's, again, part of safety risk management. Fundamentally, are the impact that this change in Part 21 are going to have in design organizations. I'll hand over to Kevin now to talk about the impact on production organizations.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Dwayne. So looking at this from a POA perspective, what I'm not going to do is basically repeat what Dwayne has said, because remember that in subpart A of Part 21, that is applicable to both design organizations and production organizations as well. So that 21A139 that we have today around our management system, which has been called a quality management system for many, many years, will now be encompassed or be alongside that together, working together as part of the production management system will be the SMS activities, or the management of safety activities, which will all take place under what we call our production management system. So like you can see there, allocation of the safety responsibilities, the safety risk management processes, which has already been explained. However, one of the key things that is actually being brought in is the requirements around safety training. And when we look back in time, it was when we went back into the 1990s through JAR 145, and we introduced the concept of human factors training for our maintenance personnel. So what the regulator is now doing is actually trying to take those lessons that we've learned, all of those that actually started off with the JA Human Factors Working Group, then we actually adjusted the regulations. We have guidance material which actually defines the scope that we actually train people. So we're trying to take those concepts, think about them in the manufacturing world, but also add on an additional module to that training to look at, okay, so what is safety to everybody? How do people in manufacturing organizations directly impact safety? Many people think they don't, but actually they do. Because remember, the very first stage of things that we do, or the second stage after design, is we make things. And if we make them incorrectly, there is an absolute chance or probability that we will be encompassing and putting into those things that we manufacture latent conditions. And those latent conditions could actually come back later in life to cause the operator harm. And there are a number of examples over the past few years where accidents and incidents have not happened just because of poor maintenance or poor airworthiness management. They've actually happened because of poor issues in manufacture. So it's very, very important we look at this from a manufacturing perspective. So we don't have 1, 4, 5 examples, we have manufacturing examples. But the big thing with training is, why do we train people? It's not just to get them to go on a course. It's about getting them to think differently. It's about getting them to behave differently. As soon as they walk out of that room, that classroom, we want them to understand, where do they actually now belong in this safety? How do they impact safety of the operator? Can we get safety into the DNA of those people who are involved in manufacturing, so we can actually make a difference way before we even deliver those aeroplanes, those parts, those appliances to the customers? So the output then actually is, then it goes back to what's already been said. It's about reporting, voluntary reporting, okay, the mandatory reporting. It's key to understand as well is that you can't report externally what has not actually been reported internally. Another key aspect when it comes to risk management, etc., is, yes, we can risk management all those activities that are going on in our organization. What we can't risk manage is the regulation. And that's pretty key for people to understand, is that the regulation is the regulation. Your certificate that you have as a POA is valid 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You can't start risk assessing the regulation, because that is the minimum, and should not be subject to risk assessment. So we see some positive opportunities by now, trying to get the people in the room, trying to get them to think differently about safety, potentially behave in different ways as well. So if something is not right, put a report in. At the end of every shift, what didn't go well today? What's not working in my management system? Did I have the tools I need? Did I have the time that I needed? If I didn't, put a report in, with the expectation that the production organization will do something about it. And it's pretty key here from a management commitment to always go back to the people who put the report in and say, thank you very much, because today we now know something that we didn't know yesterday, and that can make a massive amount of difference. So we can then look at our reports that are being put in, we can trend them. Are the people telling us about NIF, NAF and trivia? Okay, that's fine. But are they telling them about what other people have done wrong? Are they telling them about what we've done wrong? And that way we can start to actually judge the maturity of the culture within our organization. So moving on from reporting, what some of these changes are also going to implement as well is the shift away from that phrase quality assurance. Many people in many organizations, you hear it, and I've heard it in the past, and I keep on hearing it every other week, is that's quality's job, that's quality's job, or that's all QA's job. Really what we need to understand is actually quality technically is everybody's job. But what we really need to know is, what is the difference between ensuring and assuring? So the accountable manager is accountable for the organization, and actually the delegation of responsibility for compliance is passed to those responsible managers, and they are responsible for compliance. So moving ahead by removing the quality assurance phrase into compliance monitoring, it's quite simple. We can clearly state that there are managers in our production organization who are responsible for compliance, and there is a manager and a team of people in the organization who are responsible for the checking of compliance. So ownership of compliance, checking of compliance, two key distinct things with a massive line in between. What we've seen for many years in production is that the QA team are sucked into the day-to-day operation of the management system. What we really need to do is to keep them independent, and they are outwards looking inwards around the performance of that management system. Having said that, they still need to ensure that that audit program is effective, and the audit program itself is also subject to its own suite of KPIs. Next slide, please, Dwayne. So another thing that we are going to introduce, and we've said this all along, as people have said this, it is about risk management. Okay, and the biggest thing that can actually, in a production organization, bring risk is if we do not manage change properly. We are constantly doing change in manufacturing organizations, And that change, like it says on the slide that you guys can see, change can bring hazards, hazards can bring risk, uncontrolled risk can affect what we actually sign for when we're making an airworthiness release. What we really need to understand is not just the content of the regulations, but also what is the intent. And we need to manage this risk when we're actually doing these changes. We need people to own the risk, mitigate the risk, monitor the risk, making sure those checks and balances that we put in are effective before we approach the authority to get these changes accepted. So there's lots of things that are already in the regulation, but actually it's going to put more emphasis on us understanding. So if we look at 21A147 today, there are a number of things that could affect the organisation approval. Introduction of new manufacturing techniques. We're probably going through the stage now in lots and lots of POAs where we are introducing the concept of 3D printing, additive layer manufacturing. Probably the biggest change in manufacturing since the onset of composite material, etc. So we need to be able to manage those activities. That is a very risky process. And so we need to make sure we are all over it and the DOA POA arrangement is effective, especially when it comes to those. Are we thinking about changing a supply chain? Are we taking on new suppliers? Yeah. Have we given a different supplier a new approval? How are we managing that risk? Are we now going to be changing our approval scope? Are we working with other DOAs? Are we making new things? Yeah, we need to risk assess all of these so everything is actually owned, yeah, and mitigated. And ultimately, anything else that the POA believes can bring risk really is worthy of a risk assessment process. Especially on the data that you can see on the screen, the vast majority of POAs also have AS9100 approvals. And there is some great information in that particular document if it's done properly. So what we really need to do for those organizations who are not AS9100 is to make sure you examine that document, and that will help you completely understand the intent of the management of change. Thanks, Dwayne.
Okay, so clearly we've saved the most exciting topic to last. So hello again, and thanks for bearing with us so far. So 145, Dwayne, could you fill in that? Everything we've spoken about so far remains valid for the 145, and I've got no intention of repeating what my colleagues have already told you, unless you have a question around it, of course, then we can explore it. But a couple of the key points, around the management of safety and actually the identification of hazards and risks at the design and production stage will probably help the 145. Because those of you who have that background will probably know that the 145 is very often the end of the chain of dominoes. It's the last one to fall, although the results or the causes rather of that issue may sit further back along the chain. It could be a design problem, it could be a manufacturing problem or production problem. So the first step of these changes will probably help you identify those perhaps and feed that feedback loop through the external reporting system to help the designers and the production organizations identify their problems and help us to maintain their products. So there's some good stuff in here, joining the whole airworthiness picture up from beginning to end. Of course, MROs, Part 145 approved organizations are not exclusively perfect. We are likely to make mistakes ourselves, but we need to know about them. So we're back to that hazard ID, and that reporting system is a very important element of that to ensure that everything that's happening in that organization is known about and controlled. And that's the key thing, I think, there. And ideally, a lot of these principles are established already under Part 145. This is going to another level, particularly with safety. So we should be in a much better place once this is embedded and up and running to manage the safety within our organizations with a view to our actions and our impact on other areas as well, and theirs on ours. Could you, next slide please, Dwayne? So the management system, which mirrors the management system in a lot of other areas of the regulation, replaces the safety and quality policy under the current version of the regulations under A65. And I think you would it'd be hard to argue that the safety element of that part of the regulation is anything other than paper thin, that there isn't much safety behind it. But a lot of the key elements there are there already. The internal reporting, the external reporting, the management, the human factors. It's starting to build on something that the 145 already has. But by no means should this mean that you should be complacent about it and think, yeah, we're pretty much there, because there's a lot behind the change in the regulations, particularly under A200 and the safety elements in there. Including the management of change. So, this is change, and it's quite significant change. You need to make sure that in your organisation, following the new regulation doesn't introduce any problems for your organisation. And there's some areas where that may happen. So you may need a new post. You may certainly need to allocate different responsibilities to individuals. There's some hazards there. Who's got the capacity, the capability, the skills, the competence to do this? These are all things that can affect the success or not of your organisation. And establishing that policy is more than writing a shopping list for compliance. It's writing a policy that works for your organisation and not anybody else's, because there will be differences. And how do you know you're safe? Part of that policy has got to be measurement and reporting, KPIs or SPIs, or however you choose to label those. But it's how do you know you're safe, and can you prove it? And not necessarily prove it to the regulator. That's a secondary effect, really. It's prove it to yourselves and help your accountable managers sleep at night. So if you take something simple like tool control, you have a policy and a procedure to follow to manage that. And unless you have some reporting, unless you have perhaps some safety auditing, you can only assume that it's working as intended. People will find different ways to achieve the same result. Sometimes out of good intent, occasionally out of laziness, but generally it's well meant. But unless you get them to tell you what's working and what's not working and what might work instead, or where they're having trouble following the procedure that was written by management in their ivory tower and not by the boys and girls doing the job, then you are potentially unsafe and you're unaware. And that's the real uncomfortable place, isn't it? You're not aware of what risks or certainly what hazards your organisation is carrying. And you should have a policy that promotes this hazard identification, and that's the key bit. And I know Steve spoke about it quite a lot earlier on, but that's the key bit. Anything can be a hazard. A new supplier, a new product, an expansion in your scope, change in workforce, taking on new contractors, a new subcontractor. They can be hazards, but the simple things as well. Introducing training, introducing a new set of tools. How have you managed those? So let's don't focus on the big things. I've seen quite a lot of the introduction of this into part camo of everybody's gone full scale catastrophe, and they're looking at aeroplane crashes and so on. How do we protect against that? And that is very important, obviously. But they're missing the little things, the day-to-day business. So start little and build up. That's what I would suggest as we go through this change. If you have the next slide, please, Dwayne. There's also a requirement to check the effectiveness. This is part of the regulation of your systems. How well are your systems working? Are they actually working at all? Or is everybody just going, yeah, I know it says that, but it's a lot easier to do this. So how do you check? And how do you check that what you designed yesterday is still right for today? What's changed around your organisation? So that ongoing check of effectiveness is important. One one of those checks of effectiveness is when your people start telling you it's not effective, or it's not working, or it's difficult to comply with. That's really important again. That's why that occurrence reporting, that internal reporting, is really key to getting this right. Competent personnel, people who understand what they're asking for. Kev's already covered this largely, but it's an expansion of the training requirements, the competency requirements for all your people. And there was a question earlier about, should it include the cleaners in the organisation, etc. Yes, absolutely it should. If you think they present a risk, if you think that what they're doing could affect your safety, or what you're doing could affect their safety, then absolutely assess it, log it as a hazard and go through the process. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. I worked in an organisation where we realised that human factors went wider than the camo and the 145. And so we started to introduce training for the HR staff, the cleaning staff, the staff on reception, because they all had an effect on each other. And that started to show some benefits. So if you think it's right for your organisation, explore it and prove that it's right, or maybe prove that you don't need to be doing that. You can back off a bit. And as Kev said again earlier, quality is faded away, and it's now replaced by compliance and monitoring, which puts the responsibility on the individuals in the organisation to check their own compliance, to do the compliant piece, to be compliant, and not rely on somebody else keeping them on that compliance pathway. That, of course, in itself will feed into your safety management system, and safety management will also feed the compliance. So the two are mutually supportive. But that training, that understanding, and that ability to apply that understanding in the work environment is really key. So that's where your training needs to be effective, and you need to be able to prove that it's effective. And documenting the key management processes is now a requirement as well. I mean, you could say, why wouldn't you do it anyway? But this is key to investigations. So we can look at the process we had 2 years ago when we're looking back at an airworthiness review and trying to understand why there's a problem. Well, it's because probably now we know this process wasn't right or wasn't adequate, fit for purpose. That again is going to inform how you go forward. It is that rather retrospective review rather than proactive and predictive, but it's useful. It's useful to build your safety. And it's always about do what's right for your organisation. Don't try and create a shopping list to keep the regulator happy, because that doesn't really work. It doesn't lead you to that effectiveness as easily as actually designing the system for your organisation. Be a little bit selfish. Next slide, I think, please, Dwayne. Thanks. Linked to the changes with Opinion 04/2020 is a little bit more into part 145 that goes beyond the management system and safety, and it still talks about your management system, looking at planning, maintenance tasks, shifts, etc., but now includes an explicit requirement to consider fatigue on maintenance personnel, which I'm really pleased to see. I think it's a move forward. Again, this is a hazard again now, isn't it? Fatigue has always been a hazard. It's just acknowledged now. So what are you going to do about it? Well, you're going to put it through the assessment process again and review and maybe mitigate and then check that's effective. The wheel is complete now. We're starting to link everything up. And the same requirement still under planning really is with external working teams, contractors, on-site working teams, outsourced. Again, what are they going to do to your organisation, and what are you going to do to their organisation as well? That's always something to consider. So we bring that in as well. It's another hazard. How do we accurately and comfortably assess that and make sure that we remain safe as individuals and as an organisation? It's all back to your safety policy, isn't it? That's where it's going to come from. That's where you're going to reference, and that's where you're going to check that it is effective and review, update, or amend as appropriate. I think that's it. Was there more for 145? I can't remember. There's another slide. No, there's not. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, guys. Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. We've got 10 minutes to go, so I'm going to rattle through these next few slides to leave us some time for some questions. We've got some that we want to address, so we'll address all of those if we haven't already, by the way, so please do keep them coming regardless of the time. So SMS industry standards. So a guidance document, you can see it there, which has been authored by those publishers that are listed across there. So IAA, so I'll get that right in a minute, AIA across different nations, and ASD particularly contributing to the development of this document, which is essentially giving guidance and advice on how to implement safety management requirements within design, manufacturing, maintenance organisations. This is referenced as an acceptable means of compliance. So in lieu of the actual AMC being published yet, if you wanted to get ahead of the game and have a look and start to stimulate your thinking around ways in which you can implement it in your organisations, then this document is a good source document that again has been accepted as supporting the AMC. Okay, next slide, please. Right, benefits. So what you can see is the charts that are being produced. This is part of the opinion that has been presented by EASA to the Commission as part of the justification for implementing these new rules. And as part of the proposed amendment process, a survey was held, and what you'll see is the number of respondents that have responded positively to each one of those criteria. The detail, again, if you wanted to have a look at that in the opinion, you'll probably find it easier to see. But it was interesting for me looking down the list of the benefits that are identified there. Better safety culture. There's a lot of those that are facing towards the management of safety. Again, as I said earlier on, I think the benefits of improving your safety performance will also reduce the amount of failures that you have, the amount of rework, and actually just the efficiency that you've got within your organization, contributing to the overall organization's success. So if you think about some of these benefits and the commercial and operational benefits that you're going to get from implementing this in a way that really adds value, then again, you'll probably get a more robust implementation that fits in to people's day job and gets them to think about safety as part of that job. Okay, so next slide then, please, Dwayne. So costs, okay, there are some costs associated with this. And again, from the same survey conducted by EASA, you can see there the identification of training as a particular burden, then the changes within the organisation, drafting procedures, oversight costs, etc., etc. Now, what I would argue in that is that the costs that you face in terms of doing this could be offset by the savings and the lack of losses. I would also say, and what we're seeing more and more, is that organisations are talking to their insurers on an ongoing basis about the way in which they are reducing their risks, because clearly safety risks have financial and insurance risks associated with them at times. So there is the case there that if you can demonstrate that you've got an effective system and it's really adding value, then you could probably save on your insurance premiums that you're paying as an organisation, some of which I've seen are absolutely eye-watering. And the insurance market is redressing the issue that actually post 9/11, there was a huge ramp up in costs and then it froze. And they've got to the situation now where the premiums are not in balance with the payouts that they've actually got. So now is a good opportunity to reduce the scale of those increases, or at least retain your premiums at the current rate. Okay, so just think a little bit wider than the direct costs that you've got in this, and I'm sure it will incur costs. And we had a question before the session that came up, which was talking about the impact of these requirements on smaller organisations. And I absolutely sympathise with that. But what I would encourage you to do is to demonstrate to your regulator that you have created a system that is going to capture your risks in a way that works for your organization. So it doesn't have to be huge, expensive database driven. You don't have to have all sorts of digital systems. You don't have to spend an absolute fortune on training. Come up with something that's fit for purpose, that's going to add value within the organization, that your people are going to really engage with. So don't be misled, I would say, by the need to have hugely complex structures, systems, processes, and databases. That's absolutely not the intent of this rule. The intent of the rule is that you effectively manage risk. And again, if you do that in a way that supports the business, then it's something that hopefully you would want to do anyway. Right, next slide, please, Dwayne. So final words then. So as you can see there, we've got that EASA favours that single safety management system. I take away the word safety, a single management system by multiple approved organisations. And again, another question that came up that I'll address at this time, where we were asked whether each exposition needs to contain the details of the safety risk management element of the management system. Where you've got multiple approvals, there's a good case to say if the safety management element is going to address all the different areas across your wider organization, across different approvals, because it's maybe the same people, but they're all humans anyway. Maybe your processes, procedures, and compliance monitoring is all harmonized across it. Then it would be absolutely logical to have a safety manual with then a cross-reference from your individual expositions. However, you will have to demonstrate how you are complying with the rules, the new rules, within each of the expositions, and at least show how each of the approved areas interfaces with the higher level safety management capabilities. Okay, so you will have to address it at some level within each of the expositions. But yes, I would advise that you have a single safety manual where it works for you, so that you can have common processes and procedures, and it's easier to manage and standardize the way in which you think about risk. So having a taxonomy that is common to each of the areas in terms of your causal factors or your findings through investigations can help you to address wider issues in the organization and not just constrain those within the boundaries of an approved organization. So EASA said that they would not approve standalone SMS organisations. They don't envisage that. That's certainly not the intent that an organisation does that. However, there is that opportunity that organisations, particularly where they're working in a group structure, can share safety resources. But again, that would need to be demonstrated how that works within your expositions and sold to the regulators for its benefits of applying across multiple organisations that are sharing resources. Okay. So the third bullet point there really talks about that potential of the safety management element, not only address the risk of major occurrences, but also look at those precursors to the major things and address inefficiencies, improve communications, etc., etc. So again, wider benefits to think about when you're implementing this and not just ticking the SMS box, as it were. Okay. So it should be aligned with your thinking as a business, and it should be integrated in the way in which you manage your business. Okay, so it is that integrated approach that is really your opportunity to make this really work for you. Okay, so I think we're just about there. So apologize that we're really low on time to finish that, and as I said earlier, we will address these questions with a follow-up. Any of my team, have you got any questions there that you'd like to explore a little bit further at this stage? I know there was a question about the DAOS implementation there, Dwayne, and I saw that you are answered. For those of you who don't know, this is the Design Approved Organisation Scheme within the UK MOD. Anything to add on that or anything else?
Currently DEOS does require organizations, specifically design organizations, to implement a safety management system using DEFSTAN 0056. The DEFSTAN 0056 is very product centric. It talks about managing risk to life. So it doesn't look at the organizational issues. Remember, what we're really trying to do here is be far more proactive and pick up the problems in an organization long before it becomes a product safety risk issue. What are the organizational risks we need to manage? So if the RAs decide to adopt this approach, they will need to sort out or clarify that relationship. It shouldn't be too hard because lots of the RAs, I believe in the 1000 series, already have occurrence reports in that address MORs and VORs. So there's just a bit of a, how do we use DEFSTAN 006 that needs to be tweaked. But DEFSTAN 0056 is going through a revision currently. I've provided comments on it, and we'll try and drive it in that direction to consider the ICAO approach in it.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Dwayne. Right, we're out of time. So last slide then, please, Dwayne, just to wrap this up. So thank you all for joining us. Pleased to see there's so many people there. There's some details on the screen there. If you'd like to continue conversation about any of these subjects, then please do get in touch. I'll pass it on to the guys within the technical areas as appropriate. But thank you again for attending. I hope you got something out of it. I wish you the best of luck with this. And I would say, see this as an opportunity. You can either just tick the box and move forward with this, or you can actually take it as an opportunity to really improve your business performance. So with that, I wish you all the best of luck going forward. Stay safe. And I hope to see lots of you in the future as we move forward. Thanks, team. And yeah, thank you and goodbye.